She found her old diary, but the entries in it predicted her future. Kate Lawrence brushed the dust from the cardboard box she'd just pulled from the back corner of her garage. The box wasn't labeled, unlike the dozens of others she'd meticulously organized during her weekend cleaning spree. Curious, she sliced through the yellowed packing tape with her keys and peered inside. The musty scent of aged paper greeted her as she rummaged through old photographs, handwritten letters, and high school mementos. Her fingers brushed against something leather-bound at the bottom. She pulled it out, a navy blue journal with her initials embossed in faded gold on the cover. "My old diary," she whispered, a smile playing at her lips. Kate hadn't thought about this journal in years. She'd kept it religiously throughout her junior year of high school before abandoning it like most teenage habits. Settling cross-legged on the concrete floor, Kate blew dust from the cover and opened it. The pages were filled with her looping handwriting, entries about classroom crushes, fights with friends, and dreams of becoming a journalist. She flipped through, chuckling at her 16-year-old melodrama, until she reached one of the final pages. She froze. February 15, 2024. Today I found this diary in the garage. It's strange. I don't remember writing in it since 2010. Kate's breath caught in her throat. The entry described exactly what was happening right now. The date was correct, today was February 15th. She hadn't written in this diary since high school, 14 years ago. But there it was, her handwriting, unmistakable, describing this very moment. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she ran her fingers over the ink. It wasn't faded like the earlier entries. It looked fresh, as if written today, but she hadn't touched this diary in over a decade. With trembling fingers, Kate turned the page. February 16, 2024. A person who disappeared many years ago will call me. He'll ask to meet. I'll agree. She snapped the diary shut, a cold shiver running down her spine. This was impossible. Someone must be playing an elaborate prank. But who would have access to her old diary? Who could mimic her handwriting so perfectly? Kate shoved the diary back into the box and stood up, brushing dust from her jeans. She needed a drink. Or maybe sleep. Maybe she was more exhausted than she realized, seeing things that weren't there. But as she walked back to the house, the words kept repeating in her mind. A person who disappeared. A meeting. Tomorrow. That night, Kate barely slept. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with possibilities. By morning, dark circles framed her eyes as she made her coffee stronger than usual. She'd convinced herself it was all nonsense, a coincidence or misunderstanding. Perhaps she'd written those entries years ago as part of a creative writing exercise and simply forgotten. At 10:17 a.m., her phone rang. The screen displayed unknown number. Kate's hand hovered over it, heart suddenly pounding. It was probably a telemarketer. Or her editor calling from a different line. She answered. Hello. Silence on the other end, then a breath. Kate, it's me. The voice was different, rougher, older, but with an undercurrent of familiarity that sent electricity down her spine. Who is this? She gripped the counter for support. You don't recognize me? The voice sounded pained, uncertain. It's Andrew. Kate's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor. Coffee splashed her bare feet, but she barely noticed the heat. Andrew. Her best friend from college. The one who had vanished without a trace 10 years ago, leaving his apartment empty, his car in the parking lot, his wallet on his nightstand. The disappearance she'd covered in her first major piece as a journalist, the case that launched her career and haunted her dreams. This can't be you. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. I need your help, Kate. Meet me. Tonight. 8 o'clock at the old bridge. Andrew, wait, but the line had gone dead. Kate stared at her phone, then at the broken ceramic shards scattered across her kitchen floor. She should call the police. This had to be a sick joke. Andrew was gone, presumed dead after years of fruitless searching. But what if it wasn't a joke? Almost in a trance, Kate walked to her bedroom and pulled the diary from the box she'd brought inside. She opened to the next page. February 16, 2024. I'll meet Andrew at the old bridge. He'll tell me something that will change everything. Kate sank onto her bed, diary clutched to her chest. Whatever was happening, prank, coincidence, or something inexplicable, she knew she would go to that bridge tonight. The journalist in her couldn't resist the mystery. And the friend in her couldn't ignore Andrew, even if it wasn't really him. Throughout the day, Kate tried to distract herself. She called Andrew's mother, who hadn't heard anything. She scoured online news, searching for any mention of Andrew Mason's reappearance. Nothing. She even drove past his old apartment building, now renovated into luxury condos. As dusk approached, she debated telling someone where she was going. Her editor. The local detective who'd worked Andrew's case. But what would she say? That she was meeting a man who'd been missing for a decade because her magical diary told her to? Kate finally settled on texting her sister, working on a potential story tonight. If you don't hear from me by midnight, call me. Vague enough to avoid questions, specific enough to leave a breadcrumb. At 7:45 p.m., she parked her car near the old stone bridge that spanned the narrow river at the edge of town. She'd dressed in jeans, boots, and a dark jacket, practical clothes. In her pocket was pepper spray. In her purse, the diary. The February evening was cold, with fog rising from the river, swirling around the bridge's weathered arches. Kate checked her watch, 7:55. The bridge stood empty, illuminated only by a distant street lamp that cast more shadows than light. Kate pulled her jacket tighter and walked to the middle of the bridge, her footsteps echoing on the ancient stones. Below, the dark water rushed silently. Around her, the fog thickened, muffling the distant sounds of traffic. At precisely 8 o'clock, she heard footsteps approaching from the far side of the bridge. A silhouette emerged from the fog. It was a man, tall and lean. As he stepped into the dim light, Kate's breath caught. He looked exactly like Andrew, not as he would look now, in his mid-30s, but as he had looked the day he disappeared. Same tousled brown hair, same angular face, same gray eyes. He even wore similar clothes, dark jeans, a green flannel shirt, boots. "You haven't changed," he said softly. Kate couldn't breathe. This was impossible. People aged in 10 years. They didn't stay frozen in time. "Where have you been?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Andrew took a step closer. "Somewhere I shouldn't have been." "What does that mean?" "Everyone thought you were dead. There were searches, investigations." "I know." His eyes held a sadness that seemed bottomless. "I've seen the articles you wrote." "Then why didn't you come back? Why didn't you contact your mother?" "She's been devastated, Andrew." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Kate tensed, but when his hand emerged, he was holding a diary. Exactly like the one in her purse. "I know you found it," he said. Kate's mind reeled. "How?" Andrew held the diary out to her. "Open the last page." With shaking hands, Kate took it and flipped to the back. The handwriting was hers, but she had no memory of writing these words. February 16, 2024. I met Andrew. It was a mistake. She slowly looked up, questions forming on her lips, but Andrew was gone. The bridge stood empty. The fog swirled undisturbed. No footprints marked the damp stone where he had stood moments before. Kate spun around, searching the darkness. "Andrew?" she called, her voice echoing under the bridge arches. No answer. She ran to her car, heart pounding, mind racing. What had just happened? Who, or what, had she spoken to? And how had he disappeared so completely, so quickly? Back in her apartment, Kate locked the door and drew the blinds. She placed both diaries side by side on her kitchen table, identical in every way. She opened them to compare the entries. In her diary, the next page after tonight's meeting was blank. In Andrew's diary, the next page read, February 17, 2024. I'll discover what happened to Andrew 10 years ago. The truth was in front of me all along. Kate stared at the words, a chill spreading through her body. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. And somehow, her journalistic instincts told her she was no longer just covering a story, she had become part of one. Sleep evaded Kate that night. She sat at her desk until dawn, her laptop's glow illuminating the wall of notes she'd hastily assembled. News clippings of Andrew's disappearance. Printouts of her own articles. A timeline stretching back 10 years. February 13, 2014. That was the day Andrew vanished. Kate had been working as a rookie reporter for the local paper. Andrew had called her that morning, excited about something he'd discovered, something big, he'd said, but he wouldn't explain over the phone. They'd planned to meet for coffee the next day. He never showed. Kate had been the one to call the police when Andrew missed their meeting and then failed to answer calls for 2 days. She'd used her press credentials to follow the investigation closely, turning Andrew's disappearance into her first major story. The police had found nothing, no signs of struggle in his apartment, no unusual bank activity, no border crossings or plane tickets. It was as if Andrew had simply stepped out of reality. The case had gone cold after a year. Most people, including the detectives, had concluded that Andrew was dead, perhaps suicide, perhaps foul play. Only his mother and Kate had held on to hope. And now, here he was. Unchanged. Impossible. Kate rubbed her tired eyes and reached for the diaries again. She'd examined every inch of them during the night. The older entries matched her teenage memories perfectly. The newer entries, the ones predicting the future, were written in her handwriting, but with subtle differences. The pressure was lighter, the loops more pronounced. As if someone had studied her writing and replicated it almost perfectly. But who? And why? And how had they known she would find the diary yesterday? As the first light of dawn crept through her blinds, Kate made a decision. She would follow the diary's lead. She would discover what happened to Andrew. Starting with the only other person who might have answers. At 8:30 a.m., Kate pulled into the driveway of a modest suburban home with well-tended flower beds. She'd called ahead, and Martha Mason was expecting her. "Kate, dear." Andrew's mother embraced her at the door. Martha had aged considerably in the past decade, her once dark hair now completely silver, deep lines etched around her eyes. But there was still warmth in her face, still hope. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mrs. Mason. For you. Always. And please, it's still Martha." She led Kate into a living room where Andrew's presence lingered in family photographs and college trophies. "You sounded urgent on the phone. Has something happened?" Kate hesitated. How much should she share? The truth would sound delusional. "I'm revisiting Andrew's case," she said carefully. "Something's come up that might help us understand what happened." Martha's eyes lit with a fragile hope that made Kate's chest ache. "Have they found something new? After all this time?" "Not exactly," Kate said, perching on the edge of the sofa. "I'm following a different angle. I was hoping you might have access to Andrew's old journal." Martha looked surprised. "His journal? I didn't know he kept one." "It would have been a blue leather-bound book, possibly with his initials on it," Kate explained, her pulse quickening. "Similar to this." She pulled her own diary from her bag. Martha studied it, then slowly shook her head. I don't recall anything like this among his things. After he disappeared, I boxed up his belongings. Most of it is in the attic now. You're welcome to look. 30 minutes later, Kate was knee-deep in cardboard boxes, sifting through the archived life of Andrew Mason. College textbooks. Winter clothes. Sports equipment. Old tax returns and bank statements. No diary. She was about to give up when she noticed a small wooden box tucked into the corner, partially hidden beneath a stack of Andrew's university sweatshirts. The box was locked, but the key hung from a small nail on the side. Inside, Kate found a collection of odd items, foreign coins, a cracked pocket watch, dried flowers pressed between wax paper, and a small leather-bound notebook, not blue like her diary, but worn brown, with no initials. With trembling fingers, Kate opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably Andrew's, the same cramped, slanted script from the notes he used to leave on her desk at the newspaper. Most entries were mundane. Work deadlines. Reminders to call his mother. Complaints about his noisy neighbors. But the final entry, dated February 12, 2014, the day before he disappeared, made Kate's blood freeze. I found proof. The old theories were right. Reality isn't fixed, it's permeable. The bridge is more than stone, it's a threshold. I'm going through tomorrow. If I'm right, I'll be able to return. If I'm wrong, at least I'll know. Kate reread the passage several times, her journalist's mind racing. What theories? What proof? And the bridge, was it the same bridge where she'd met Andrew last night? Martha appeared in the attic doorway with 2 mugs of coffee. Find anything? Kate quickly closed the notebook and slipped it into her pocket. She wasn't ready to share this yet, not when she barely understood it herself. Nothing definitive, she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. But I may have a new lead to follow. Martha's eyes lingered on Kate's face. You know something, don't you? Something you're not telling me. Kate met her gaze, torn between truth and kindness. I don't know anything for certain yet. But I promise, if I find Andrew, you'll be the first to know. Back in her car, Kate called her editor and requested a few personal days. Then she drove straight to the city library, Andrew's notebook burning a hole in her pocket. The librarian directed her to the local history section, where Kate spent hours poring over books and archives. She found nothing about mysterious bridges or permeable reality, but she did discover something interesting in a century-old newspaper clipping. The stone bridge where she'd met Andrew had been the site of several disappearances over the years. Most were eventually solved, runaways, suicides, 1 murder, but 3 cases remained open, including a local physics professor who vanished in 1967. Kate was about to leave when her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. You're looking in the wrong place. Meet me at the University Physics Building. Room 317. 4 p.m. She stared at the message. It could be a trap. It could be Andrew. Either way, she knew she would go. The physics building was mostly empty when Kate arrived, late Friday afternoon, with most students already gone for the weekend. Room 317 was at the end of a long hallway on the 3rd floor. The door was unlocked. Inside, old-fashioned chalkboards covered the walls, filled with equations Kate couldn't begin to comprehend. The room appeared empty, but as the door closed behind her, a figure emerged from behind a tall bookshelf. It wasn't Andrew. It was a woman in her 70s, with short silver hair and alert eyes behind round glasses. She wore a cardigan over a blouse adorned with celestial patterns, stars, planets, swirling galaxies. You must be Kate Lawrence, the woman said, extending a hand. I'm Eleanor Voss. I believe we have a mutual friend. Kate cautiously shook her hand. Are you talking about Andrew Mason? Eleanor gestured to a chair. Please, sit. This might take some time to explain. I'd rather stand, thanks, Kate said, positioning herself near the door. How do you know Andrew? I don't, not personally, Eleanor replied, settling into a chair herself. But I knew his father very well. We were colleagues here, in the physics department. Kate frowned. Andrew's father died when he was a child. Car accident. That's the official story, Eleanor said with a sad smile. The truth is more complicated. Robert Mason didn't die in a car crash. He disappeared, just like your friend. Just like Professor Allen before him. The physics professor who vanished in 1967, Kate said, recalling the newspaper article. Eleanor looked impressed. You've done your homework. Yes, Henry Allen was my mentor. He was working on a theory, something revolutionary involving quantum mechanics and Einstein-Rosen bridges. Wormholes? Kate asked skeptically. That's the popular term, yes. But his theory went further. He believed that reality itself was layered, multiple dimensions existing in the same space, separated only by specific energy frequencies. And he believed he'd found a way to move between them. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. At the old stone bridge. Eleanor nodded. The location matters. There are places where the barriers between realities are naturally thinner. Henry found the bridge by accident. He disappeared there during an experiment. 7 years later, Robert Mason, Andrew's father, continued Henry's work. He disappeared too. Kate's world shifted.